the top of the year, there were 1,000 Americans that took a survey about what were their goals or resolutions, if you will, for this year. 48% of those Americans responded saying that improved fitness was their top goal. Improved fitness. And that's 10% more than improved financial performance. 48%, y'all. But about 8% of that 48% stuck with those goals for more than a month. Just a month. Is that relatable for anybody in the room? Has anybody started out new year, new me, and now 7 months into the year? It's a new year, but it looks a lot like the same you. I know that feeling. I don't want to say that this is something that I've mastered. Me and my wife have recently started the famous E2M, Eager to Motivate. Yeah, maybe you've heard of it. Quite a few people in the church have tried it and lost 25 and 30 pounds. I said, why not me, Lord? Me too, we'll join. It's an 8-week program in which they tell you what to eat and when to work out. And about 3 days into the program, I realized, at work, I get free food for lunch every day. Lunch is catered at work. And they don't seem to know that I'm on E2M. And I don't seem to know that I'm on E2M. And so I realized, yes, it's good, and I trust what E2M will do for me. But when it came time for me to apply the discipline to stick with it, all of a sudden the small fine print came out that says, results may vary. It is a good program. I know that it's good, but I just can't trust and stick with the dedication and discipline that's required. So whether it's improved financial performance, whether it's improved fitness, I want us to see that hard work and dedication and discipline is required. But what does the Bible say about the relationship between wisdom and dedication? Today, that gives us a chance to get into our next book of our Ways of the Wise sermon series in Proverbs. Proverbs is the book that we're going to jump into today. So a little bit of context for Proverbs. Proverbs was written mostly by King Solomon. A few other contributions, but mostly credited to King Solomon. The goal of Proverbs is that the reader or audience would develop a practiced set of skills for living well in God's world based on a fear of the Lord. I'll say that one more time. The goal of Proverbs, as you're reading through it in our Bible reading plan, hopefully you'll join us. You can jump in right now. If you haven't started before, it's on the hub. That beautiful young lady before me, what's up, girl? She told us, I'll marry her again if I could. She told us about the hub. But I want us to hear the purpose of Proverbs is to help the reader develop a practiced set of skills for living well in God's world based on a fear of the Lord. And as we're reading through Proverbs, I think we'll see that it shows us how we should apply what we know about God. See, up to this point in our reading plan, we've seen that God has shown who he is. We've seen his character. We've seen his power, his might, his grace, his forgiveness. His forgiveness. And now we get a chance to say, now that we know these things to be true about God, what will we do with those? What will be our response? Proverbs shows us applicably how can we live the good life. And before I go too far, last week we defined the good life to be one that's not necessarily aimed at ease and comfort, but instead it's a life that's aimed at knowing God deeper and having a full, intimate relationship with him. And so as we go through Proverbs, we can see specifically what does it look like to live those things out. Proverbs gives us a chance to learn wisdom from previous generations. And if I'm honest, that's my favorite way to learn. Why make my own mistakes when I can learn from your mistakes? I can watch your successes, see what worked for you, and then apply those things. But also important to keep in mind as we read Proverbs, after the first 9 chapters, Proverbs is typically known for the short, pithy sayings that go from chapters 10 to chapter 31. And I want us to understand that those things are comparisons that describe probabilities, not necessarily promises. Maybe I've heard some of these, help a young preacher out. A bird in hand is worth more than 2 in the bush. There we go. I was looking, wait a minute, y'all from the South, right? Somebody? Maybe y'all moved in. A bird in hand is worth more than 2 in the bush. Let's try another one. If you give a man a fish, you feed him for a day. But if you teach a man to fish, feed him for a lifetime. Now, we don't take these things to be literal. I doubt any of you are actually catching birds with your hand for some reason. Then looking for 2 more birds in a bush thinking, should I go for the bush birds or the hand birds? Now, some of y'all may fish. That's not my testimony, but maybe take me with you at some point, maybe. But some of y'all may fish, but I'm sure when somebody brought this up to you, this saying of giving a fish versus teaching a fish, it probably wasn't in the context of actual fishing. Instead, these are concepts that describe an underlying principle. It's better to trust what you know will happen instead of being greedy to chase something more. It's better to help people for sure, but help them in a way that empowers them instead of causing them to be dependent. A similar product or concept as we get into Proverbs. For instance, Proverbs chapter 22, verse 6, very commonly known scripture typically. It tells us that we should train up a child in the way that he should go. Even when he is older, he will not depart from it. And now, while there is a good chance if we expose our children to the ways of God when they are young and show them this is how we can respond to God and live in his good world, there's a really good chance they'll stick with that. But there is no guarantee. And I want us to see if we look at these things as promises, then as our children get older and they make disappointing decisions or they do things that are just unbecoming of what we taught them, now we're either going to blame ourselves as parents, I should have did more, I should have did something differently, or we'll blame God. God, you said if I do this, this is what will happen to my child. But as we all know, we have to choose God for ourselves. And I believe we'll see in both Job's and Ecclesiastes, the previous and preceding books of wisdom, same literature, wisdom, these books show us that in this broken world, there is several things of complications and nuances. But in Proverbs specifically, we're looking at how to apply the knowledge that we have of God, what it looks like daily to live out God's wisdom. So I believe that brings us to our main idea today. Write this down if you can. Good students, take notes. I'm in the house. Pursuing God produces godly wisdom. Pursuing God will produce godly wisdom. Our anchor text today will be Proverbs chapter 2, verse 6. Proverbs chapter 2, verse 6. And as you're pulling that up, Vertical Church, I just want to be honest with you. As a communicator, I'm just going to show you my hand. Typically, there's some techniques and strategies to keep the people pulled in and hit them with a switcheroo at the end. From the beginning, I'm telling you, my goal today is that you will leave desiring and trusting the wisdom of God. My goal for you today is that you will leave desiring and trusting the wisdom of God. I don't want you to leave trusting in things like conventional wisdom, which is basically a widely agreed upon cultural statements and beliefs. And while conventional wisdom falls short of God's wisdom in several ways, one of the main ways is conventional wisdom changes. Why base your life on something that will change? For instance, there was a point in which medical doctors thought the best way to fix you when you're not feeling good is to bleed you so the bad blood comes out. Now, how does the bad blood separate itself from the good blood? Does the bad blood just want to escape your arm or your leg when you're not feeling good? And I'm pretty sure now nobody's doctor is actually bleeding them. At least I hope. So while conventional wisdom tends to change, God's wisdom is set. It never changes. I don't want you to leave today trusting in self-help techniques. Maybe you just bought your self-help book. You can still read it. Don't waste your money. I work in finance. I don't want you to waste your money. Read your book. And while self-help techniques aren't entirely harmful, they are at the very least selfish. They're focused on you, your season, your comfort, your next best. Whereas God's wisdom is typically keeping in mind others and God's original content, God's original intent for creation. I don't want you to leave today focused on African proverbs or fortune cookies or Snapple bottle cap tops or bubblegum wrappers or Aesop's fables. I want you to build your life on God's wisdom. And if we are going to trust God's wisdom, we first have to desire it because pursuing God produces godly wisdom. So hopefully you're there now. Proverbs chapter 2, verse 6. It'll be on the screens for you as well. For the Lord gives wisdom. From his mouth come knowledge and understanding. For the Lord gives wisdom. From his mouth come knowledge and understanding. Now, I know that probably feels like, so what exactly is going on? Seems like we kind of jumped in the middle of something. And so I wanted to see at the beginning of Proverbs chapter 2, kind of what sets the scene. So now we're going to read the previous 5 verses. We start here with, my son, if you receive my words and treasure up my commandments with you, making your ear attentive to wisdom and inclining your heart to understanding. Yes, if you call out for insight and raise your voice for understanding, if you seek it like silver and search for it as hidden treasures, verse 5, then you will understand the fear of the Lord and find the knowledge of God. Takes us to the first thing I think the author wants us to see is that God's wisdom comes into our life as a product of pursuit. God's wisdom comes into our life as a product of pursuit. One of the first things we have to admit and agree upon is nobody drifts into wisdom. You won't just naturally find yourself there one day. We all want it, we all need it, but we won't just accidentally get there. It will take our desire and our discipline and our dedication if we want to grow in wisdom. The speaker here was urging us, hey, trust what I'm telling you. It kind of puts me in the mind of conversations I've had with my dad over the years where he uses phrases like, hey, man, I don't know everything, but I know this. I look forward to the day where I can sit my kids down like, hey, I don't know everything, but what I do know is this. This is the tone that we'll see throughout this whole chapter. As we're speaking to, in this case, the son, and now we can take from that, we want to make sure that we are trusting that God's wisdom is enough to guide us through life. I think 3 things that help us understand our pursuit as we're pursuing God and his wisdom is that pursuit is intentionally attentive, involves us humbly asking, and then passionately seeking. Our pursuit will be intentionally attentive, humbly asking, and passionately pursuing. So let's deal with intentionally attentive. Intent fuels action. Based on what your intent is, it will inform what your actions will be. And I hope we see that there's a lot of verbs here in these first 5 verses. We have words like, if you will receive, action word. If you will treasure, which means to make personally important. If you will make your ear attentive. If you will incline your heart. These things take intentionality. They don't just happen over time. It's a describing of a desire to try and to strain and to try again. And to get confused, go back to the drawing board, but then get back in the game. We want to make sure that we have this type of desire as we're chasing God's wisdom. So whether it's E2M, P90X, healthy financial standing, all of these things have good, trusted results, but we have to stick with them for it to happen. How much more of our pursuit of God? When things happen in life that will cause you to back away, because God, this ain't what you said would happen to me. This ain't what I thought would happen here, God. Maybe this ain't working the way that I thought it would, but God is worth our pursuit. As we talked about, he is the creator and the sustainer of all things. The same one that has created everything that you can see is willing to sustain you as well. Why not pursue that God? Next, I want us to see that it involves us humbly asking. Humbly asking. The author challenges the reader to call out for insight and to raise your voice for understanding. Man, I just take rest in the fact that I can ask God for his guidance. Man, a frequent prayer that I pray frequently is, God, help me with your wisdom to raise these kids. Because why would you, what are you doing? There's no way I was like this when I was growing up. Now, don't get me wrong, Aria Schmelk, that's my girl. She'll listen to me. Aria, we pretty good. But Nathaniel Reed, man, my son, he seems to challenge who really runs the house. But the thing is, as a parent, they don't know, this is my first time ever doing this. There's not a book on how to raise Aria and Nathaniel Reed. I constantly feel like I'm guessing. Was I too firm? Was I too soft? Am I moving them too fast? Am I going too slow? And in the background is the pressure of how important is the presence of a parent in a child's life. man, I don't want to mess it up. But I know I can go to God and say, God, you know their future. They were your kids before they were mine. Father, give me wisdom on how to raise these kids. And so for you, maybe it's not kiddos. But what is the thing that is putting pressure on you in your life? The last thing you think about before you go to sleep, and the first thing you're thinking about in the morning. That thing that you've rehearsed in your head of, it could go like this and be good, but it could go like this and be bad. I want you to know, Vertical Churches, you can take that thing to God and ask for his guidance. For he is more than able, through his wisdom, to guide us through life. And truly, he wants to do that. What I enjoy about my relationship with God is it's the only relationship I have where he expects me to show up dependent. He wants me to show up and say, I need your help. Every single time. We can ask God for his guidance. Next, I want us to see passionately seeking. We want to be passionately seeking God and his wisdom. The text goes on to describe seeking for it as silver, or as for searching as for hidden treasures. Now, let's be honest, few things passionately bring out a sense of pursuit than money. A lot of people like to chase the dollar bills, y'all. But I think what's underlying of this silver and this hidden treasure and even money itself is the confidence in the value of that thing you are searching for. The object of your pursuit, you have confidence that it is valuable. And so I wonder, at times we got to consider, have we lost the value that we have for God's wisdom? So I know for me, I typically use phrases like, it ain't that serious. When it's time for me to get up and read my Bible to start the day, or for me to stop throughout the day and pray and talk to God. But because it's difficult and I don't really feel like doing it and I'm doing all right, it ain't that serious. Or with our reading plan, 4 chapters a day, it's good for me. I've learned so much about God in the Bible, but when it's difficult because the new game just came out and I want to play that, but I got 4 chapters waiting on me, I tell myself stuff like, who can really keep this up? Just making excuses. Who can really do this? Or when I'm struggling to leave my sin behind because I just really like it and it brings me comfort, I find myself saying things like, maybe this ain't for me. Maybe this whole Christian thing just ain't for me. This is as far as I can go. And when I'm all out of excuses, I go to my ace in the hole. God knows my heart. Come on, you with me, Renee? God knows my heart. But all of these statements communicate me lowering the bar for my effort and justifying where I am. What's worse, Vertical Church, is it shows a distrust in God's wisdom, as if he needs help, as if he doesn't know what he's talking about, as if he's expecting too much from me. And when I get in these places, we have the opportunity now to mix God's wisdom with things like conventional wisdom. Now I'm mixing with, I know what God said, but people don't really do stuff like that anymore, so I'm going to modernize God's intent. Or I find myself mixing God's wisdom with personal experience. Lord, I know what you called me to do, but I'm going to put my own spin on it, and then we really going to have something there. God, I'm going to help you out. Or I find myself mixing God's wisdom with the fear of what happened last time I tried to do it God's way. God, if that's what you wanted me to do, and everybody ended up walking away, I don't think I'm going to do it like that next time. A pivotal verse in Proverbs, chapter 1, verse 7, a very pivotal verse that kind of sets the tone for the whole book. Proverbs 1, verse 7 says, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. Fools despise wisdom and instruction. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. Fools despise wisdom and instruction. So we want to deal with this fear of the Lord. We can't move forward if we don't know what that means. And so I believe this fear of the Lord is referring to our relationship with God. So depending on what your relationship is, it'll define your fear. If there is no relationship with God, then this fear is a heightened awareness of your sin and the fact that it's against a holy God. When you realize that you are opposing the God of the Bible, the creator of all things, that's fear. But for us, those that are following Christ, this fear refers to a reverence of who God is and what he's done through his son, Jesus Christ. But I want us to see that either way, this fear is the beginning of knowledge, which is only the beginning. Wisdom requires both a knowledge and an application of what we know. if we want to live wisely daily, we'll have to take what we know about God and let that inform our decisions and our behavior so we can properly pursue God. We want to use God's wisdom for God's purpose. So write this down if you can. Wisdom is a practiced skill developed over time only by those that will discipline themselves to seek it. Wisdom is a practiced skill. Nobody drifts into wisdom. Wisdom is a practiced skill that is developed over time, yet only by those that will discipline themselves to seek it. So daily, we want to make sure as we mature in Christ that we are following and pursuing God in his wisdom. Now, we saw a lot of ifs in these verses. I want to make sure we understand these conditional ifs don't refer to whether or not God will make himself available to us, but instead, will we continuously pursue him? Because if we don't obtain God's wisdom, it's not because he didn't make it available, it's because we didn't see it valuable enough to pursue. We didn't see it valuable enough to stick with what was before us as we sought after it. So I pray this week, a way to apply this sermon, I want you to consider, what are you pursuing? What are you after? What has your attention? What causes you to do these verbs? To make your ear attentive. To incline your heart towards it. Because we all have something. There is something that you are trusting. There is something that you are seeking after, and I just want you to know what it is. And then once you find out what that thing is, I hope you compare it to God. Now, don't get me wrong, these can be good things. You can pursue certifications to develop your career. That's great. But at some point, your career will be over, but God will still be there. Perhaps you're pursuing building a strong family. That's a beautiful thing. But at some point, that family will move on with their lives as well, but God will still be there. And while it's great to go after good things, they won't always lead us to God. But if we seek after God, he will always lead us to good things. All of these things were created by God and therefore should not compete with God. Because y'all, they can't satisfy us, they can't sustain us, and they can't keep us like God can. So what is God's response to our pursuit? What is God's response to our pursuit? Our second point for today, God's wisdom is provided for protection. I think we see here in this chapter, God's wisdom is provided for protection. So by his grace, God gives wisdom. We never earn or deserve it, but God gives his wisdom. Now, while his wisdom can be used to guide us and comfort us, I think specifically here we see that God's wisdom protects us. So we'll read verses 6 through 10. Proverbs 2, verses 6 through 10. For the Lord gives wisdom, from his mouth come knowledge and understanding. He stores up wisdom for the upright. He is a shield to those who walk in integrity, guarding the paths of justice, watching over the way of his saints. Then you will understand righteousness and justice and equity, every good path. Verse 10, for wisdom will come into your heart, and knowledge will be pleasant to your soul. There's a couple of different ways I think we can see God's protection here. We see protection by proximity, protection from self, and protection from the ways of the world. Protection by proximity, the relationship we have with God, protection from self, and protection from the ways of the world. So protection by proximity, man, it's a story that comes up in the Reed's residence frequently. I'm not the hero in this story, so I'm not really crazy about it. But I'm going to tell y'all because it's for the cause of Christ. We were looking for houses at one point. I was 6 or 7. Didn't really rock with dogs. It was known. Fred Reed Jr. don't rock with the dogs. The dogs don't rock with Fred Reed. And so we're looking for houses, and there's a dog around the way. And I'm looking at the houses with my mom and dad, but I'm watching Scruffy over here. What's Scruffy on? And as he comes over to play, I run away from my family. I just take off. I don't know why they ain't running, but I'm going to get out of here. And so eventually they realize, oh, the dog just wanted to play with you. I'm sure. They call the dog off, and now I realize my family is way over there. And immediately I'm upset with my dad. Why are you so far away? Why didn't you protect me from this dog? He asked me, why did you run away? The protection I could have received by being in his proximity as my father, he would have never let anything happen to me. But when the stress came in and I was unsure, I went my own route. But as we stay close to God, specifically in times of suffering, come on, Job. As we stay close to God and wrestle with him, we are protected by being in his proximity. From his mouth, we can receive wisdom and knowledge. I love verse 8 because he takes ownership of us. It says he guards the path of his saints. Not because we're perfect, not because there aren't misunderstandings, not because we don't lack motivation at times, but because he is committed to us. So we can be protected by being in his proximity. But also, how does God's wisdom affect our horizontal relationships? That gives us an idea of our vertical relationship with God, but horizontally, how does God's wisdom affect our lives? I believe we see that in verses 11 through 19. Discretion will watch over you. Understanding will guard you, delivering you from the way of evil, from men of perverted speech, who forsake the paths of uprightness to walk in the ways of darkness, who rejoice in doing evil and delight in the perverseness of evil. 15, men whose paths are crooked and who are devious in their ways. So you will be delivered from the forbidden woman. From the adulteress with her smooth words, my God, who forsakes the companion of her youth and forgets the covenant of her God. Verse 18, for her house sinks down to death and her paths to the departed. None who go out to her come back, nor do they regain the paths of life. And before we get on this adulterous woman, I want us to see protection from self. We need to be delivered from our evil ways. What comes naturally to us is disobedience to God. A sense of, I heard what you said, God, but I got this one. I know how to handle this one. No one drifts into wisdom, but we do drift into comfort. And we do drift into disobedience. And we do drift into pride. So we want to watch our drifting. Otherwise, we will end up like the men that are described in these verses. We have to constantly be aware that it's in us to be like these men, perverted speech, delighting in what's evil, chasing after the forbidden woman. And then finally, we'll see a protection from the world. Ask y'all a quick question. Why is it that the forbidden things are so attractive? The forbidden things are what we want. It's not until you go on a budget, I ain't spending no more money. That the group chat says, y'all want to go to Puerto Rico? Oh, wait. It's not until you ain't buying nothing else, no more. I ain't buying nothing this month. Bing, bing. Your favorite thing you was going to buy 2 months ago is on sale. You guessed it, for a limited time only. These are things that you said, hey, I'm not doing this anymore. We have to realize the forbidden things for us can be the attractive things, and we need God's wisdom to protect us from these things. But again, the writer urges us, as a loved one giving you knowledge, where I'm from, putting you on game. I don't know everything, but this I know. Our horizontal relationships, the people we allow to get close to us and have influence on us, can be catastrophic. We have to be careful of who we allow in our lives and the influence we allow them to have. One thing that really convicted me is I don't really decide who's in my life based on their reverence of God. Nah, it's not that. It's, are you funny? Are you cool? Are you nice to my wife and my kids? Maybe you're a cool person, that's fine. And then over time, I start to drift. But through God's wisdom and reverencing God, again, we saw that's the beginning of knowledge. Having a sense of reverence for God is starting to be a prerequisite for me. If you want to be close to me, I got to know, where do you and God stand? Not that we can't be friends, but how close will we be? And so maybe you're here now. Through this sermon, you realize you might be in a relationship or friendship with a foolish person. Don't look at them. Don't look at them. Maybe they're here. Don't look at them. But man, what do? I just realized I'm in a relationship with a fool. For me, growing up in church, it was always cut them off, leave them, break up with them. And maybe that's the case. Or maybe God is just inviting you to set boundaries in that relationship. Maybe God is calling you to show up differently with a reverence for God in that relationship. So now they realize if I want to occupy space in this person's life, I have to cultivate a reverence for God. So maybe God does want you to break up with him. I don't know. But what I do know is that we can seek God for his guidance. You can ask God, even this week, even right now, Father, how would you have me to handle this relationship? He will provide his wisdom for protection. And as I close, my last point today, God's wisdom takes us on a practiced path. God's wisdom takes us on a practiced path. God's wisdom leads us on a path that ultimately and eternally leads to him. Eternally leads to him. As we've seen in our reading plan, this has always been his goal. He's always wanted us to be with him and depend on him forever. Now, staying on God's path is practice because it can be uncomfortable. It can be confusing. God, what are you doing? If I'm honest, it can be painful at times. It comes with sacrifice. But I can promise you this, it's worth it. God is the prize, and staying on his path is worth it. As we finish our last 3 verses here, I hope you see it. So you will walk in the way of the good and keep to the path of the righteous. For the upright will inhabit the land, and those with integrity will remain in it. Oh, but the wicked will be cut off from the land, and the treacherous will be rooted out of it. Last thing I want to leave you with here is that the purpose of wisdom and Proverbs is not a specific outcome, but instead following a person. Proverbs itself and wisdom itself is not about seeking specific outcomes, but instead following a person. God has invited us and constantly invites us into relationship with him. We believe that when God created the world, everything was good. As a good designer, he shows us the intention of his heart. There was harmony between man and God, creation and man and woman. And yet sin sneaks in and the world becomes broken. But being the loving God that he is, he couldn't leave it in that state. He sends Jesus to fix the world. Jesus, born of a virgin. Jesus, 100% man, 100% God, lives the perfect life, specifically the good life, which is completely obedient to God, unlike you and I. And then Jesus dies the death of a sinner to take our place, to pay our debt owed to God for our disobedience. But then he rises. His resurrection proves that God has accepted his sacrifice on our behalf. And now we have the opportunity to follow Jesus into relationship with God. I want us to see if we don't take advantage of this opportunity, then we're left trying to figure life out on our own. With your limited knowledge, with your limited wisdom, with your limited expectations and experience, you're trying to figure it out on your own when God has provided a way to be connected to him so that he can lead and guide. So as I close, perhaps you've come here today and realized you're not trusting in the finished works of Jesus. You don't have the opportunity to trust in his wisdom and rest in his wisdom because you haven't given your life to him. The first thing I want to say is God loves you. God cares about you. I don't believe that it is by happenstance you happen to be here today to hear this message. It is yet another opportunity, an offering from God to be in relationship with you. We would love to pray with you as our leaders come to the front and pray that you would give your life to Christ and then have a conversation of what that actually looks like. Or perhaps you're here as somebody that is following Christ, but you realize throughout the sermon that your desire to pursue God's wisdom is waning. Whether it's the busyness of life or some difficult decision that you've made or just the hurt and pain of sacrifice, you realize, yeah, God is king, but I'm on break right now. I'm on timeout. Man, today is a great day to ask God to give you the desire to seek him again. We would love to pray that for you because most of us have been there before. We know what it's like to be so confused that you don't want to take a step. But we also know that God's goodness is enough to encourage us to keep taking steps. And in finally, maybe you're someone that knows God and knows a lot about God, but when it comes time to make decisions, instead of trusting God's wisdom, we mix it with other things. You learned a lot. You know it forwards and backwards. You got the scriptures memorized, but in your life, we can't tell you're on E2M. You're eating the free fruit at work. Today is a great day to expose the lies of the enemy that you are believing, to hopefully open your heart to the truth of God's word and that God is good and he can be trusted. We would love to pray for you today. And of course, the final offering for prayer, just any sense of general prayer. We would definitely welcome you here for prayer once our leaders come to the front. But I want us to make sure we understand, as I'm taking my seat, that God's wisdom is enough for us. God created the world. You'll see in Proverbs 8, if you stick with the reading plan, that it is described that through his wisdom, God designed the world. If God can design the world with that wisdom, how much more can he keep you and I? My friends, don't sacrifice the rest that comes with trusting God, allowing God to figure your life out, allowing God to lead you through the maze of life. There will be setbacks, there will be difficult situations, but he will never leave and he will never forsake us.